All right, at the end of the last set of notes, we said we were going to talk about the impacts of World War II and some important things that happened during World War II. So we're going to look at the Holocaust, the atomic bomb, United Nations, and the other impacts World War II actually had. Now, as far as the Holocaust is concerned, Hitler, when he came to power in Germany, he decides, remember, that Germany's kind of in a bad situation, and Hitler decides that he wants to unite the people. So he decides the easiest way to unite the people would be to unite them with a common sense of hatred. But he's got to find something that he wants to blame for all the problems Germany's having. So he wants to spread his belief that the German race was stronger and better and smarter than any other people on the face of the earth. And what Hitler means when he says German race is actually white Christian German people, is what he means. So what he decides to do then is he directs most of his hatred towards Jewish people and says that they're all to blame for all the problems we're going through. This depression we're going through, the fact that we're not a world power anymore, and he puts all the blame on Jews. So he encourages what is called anti-Semitism, which is a hatred of Jewish people. And he told the people of Germany that the Jews were to blame for all of their problems. Now, that's not true, but that's where he puts all the blame. It's a lot easier to blame people than it is to take any responsibility for anything else. So a lot of German people buy into this. They say, you're right. That is their fault. It's their fault that we're in all this trouble. So, of course, if you've got one person telling you all these things, and you believe what he's saying, then you're happy that he's come to power. You're happy that he's the dictator of your government. So a lot of people really felt like Hitler was the right thing for Germany at this time. And he does, as you saw in World War II, the notes, he does make Germany a world power again. So he does hold up all his promises that he made. The Nazi government, now keep in mind the Nazi was Hitler's political party, the Nazi government began restricting the rights of Jews. They passed laws that would not let Jews hold government jobs. They took their businesses and property away from them. The Jewish people lost their jobs, no matter what they were, not just government jobs, but all their jobs. And they made them live in special areas. Those areas were called the ghettos, which are kind of slum areas that are bad to live in. They're overcrowded. But these are all the things that they did to the Jewish people in the beginning. It gets worse, though. Hitler had anyone he thought of as an enemy collected and put in concentration camps, which are prison camps for people thought to be dangerous to the Nazis. Now, what that is, when I say anyone, obviously Jews were one, but Hitler had gypsies, mentally and physically disabled people, homosexuals, Roman Catholics, anyone that Hitler believed was either impure or dangerous to the Nazi cause. He wanted them rounded up and taken away and put in these camps so they couldn't threaten what he was doing here. So it wasn't just Jewish people, but it was lots of different groups. What Hitler comes up with is called his final solution. In 1941, Hitler decides to set in motion his final solution to what he called the Jewish problem. And his solution was genocide, which is an attempt to kill all the people of a certain race or religious group. And of course, in this case, Hitler's genocide focused on the Jewish people. Now, you've heard of Holocaust before, I hope, but Holocaust is an attempt by the Nazi government during World War II to destroy all Jewish people. And in fact, they are successful in killing about 6 million Jews in the Holocaust all across the concentration camps, the death camps they were sent to at this time period. Obviously, Hitler does not succeed in his final solution because the Allies do win World War II and they do discover these concentration camps and they do put an end to it. But the horrors that went on here, I didn't really touch on the experiments they did on people in these concentration camps and the tortures that went on there. But it was it was the worst part of World War II was the Holocaust and the events that went on. The atomic bomb, I talked a little bit about that in the World War II notes, where we said that forced Japan's surrender. A little bit of history on the atomic bomb. The United States is the first nation to create the atomic bomb. Now, scientists had discovered how to split the atom to create energy, and lots of nations had decided to use this energy as a weapon. And both the Allies and the Axis were trying to figure out how to make a weapon out of it. The United States just beats everybody else to it. The atomic bomb was used for the first time in World War II when the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are bombed, which again I talked about in the first set of notes, and that forces Japan's surrender. It also helps to make the United States one of the most powerful nations in the world, which we'll talk about here in a second, the impacts of the war. As far as just the impacts of the war, the cost of the war was over $1 trillion. That's right, $1 trillion. 55 million people died, both soldiers and civilians, meaning non-military people. United States and the Soviet Union become the two most powerful countries in the world after World War II and develop an intense rivalry, which if you ever heard of the Cold War, that's what happens between the Soviet Union and the United States. From the end of World War II, 1945, all the way up till 1989, 1990, there's going to be a Cold War, which is really just an argument between political systems. Which is better, a democracy or communism? So this is going to set off the Cold War, which we will be talking about. The United Nations are established. Now, keep in mind, we talked about the League of Nations, and the League of Nations was supposed to be put in place, if you remember, after World War I to stop any more wars. Well, it fails, obviously, because we had World War II, so the League of Nations does not succeed. And what comes out of that is they decide to do away with the League of Nations and create the United Nations. And if you remember, one of the weaknesses of the League of Nations was they didn't have a military force to back up anything they said. The United Nations will have a military force to back them up. And so, established on October 24th, 1945, this time, one of the big things is the United States does join the United Nations. If you remember, the United States did not join the League of Nations. So, one of the most powerful countries in the world joins the United Nations. Their main goal is to protect world peace and human rights throughout the world, and they're going to try and solve problems without having any wars. But again, the United Nations really comes about because people knew that the League of Nations had failed. So, League of Nations wiped out, the United Nations is created in its place. And of course, the United Nations is still around today. We still do have the United Nations.